perfection is the enemy of good? And how do you make sure you're not sitting in a place where you're trying to get this perfect? And how do you make sure you're getting it done in a way that's doing it right? And I think the answer to that sits most likely just in, is this something that we're going to have to do more than once? Because if it becomes something we're going to have to do more than once, then most likely we should probably do it right.
You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm your host, Cory, and today I'm talking to Adrian Rosenkranz. He's a well-known leader in the enterprise software industry with more than a decade of success scaling go-to-market teams at category leaders like Salesforce. He currently is the CRO at Webflow, the AI-native visual development CMS platform helping modern brands differentiate, scale, and move faster. There, he leads all GTM functions across sales, marketing, customer success, partnerships, and RevOps, helping Webflow evolve from a breakout product to a trusted platform for some of the world's most innovative brands, like value selling. All right, Adrian, thank you so much for coming. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. And before we dig into all the Webflow stuff, obviously, I can resist the plug. I'm a customer, love the platform. I really want to talk through your journey and how you got to where you are. As we were talking a little bit before, you started off, you played D1 football, you have a degree in international relations from Stanford, and then you had a few different wildly varied intern experiences, and then you went the RevOps route. So can you talk us through kind of how that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting, it actually started because I played AYSO soccer. And when I was 5, my coach at the time, he was one of my friend's dads, and I stayed in touch with him, and he was in tech. And fast forward to when I was graduating, I had a conversation with him and I was debating what I wanted to do. And obviously with my experience in political economics and international relations, I was thinking something very different. And he said to me, who do you think is the most valuable person in a company? And I answered CEO. And then the next question was, well, who do you think gets paid the most? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, if pay is a reflection of value, typically what you'll see is whoever's leading revenue ends up getting paid the most, because bringing revenue into the company is the most important thing. You obviously have to have a product, but without revenue, you can't keep going. And from there, it completely changed my mindset. And that's when I decided to look at a completely different approach to what I wanted to do. And I said, okay, I need to understand how businesses make money and how to bring in money to businesses to be successful.
I mean, it makes sense. It's funny how much of a light bulb moment that is for various people. I know, I had a friend in college, and his dad originally thought he was going to be a Baudelaire scholar, right? Ends up going into sales and actually go the CRO route as well. Maybe I should start listening to some of this advice, because I hear from marketing leaders that transition to sales and they think, oh, I get to solve so much more intriguing problems over here, right? I get to really get close to the lifeblood of the business. So it's fascinating how many people end up going down that route from varied backgrounds. So let's say, what would you say that your core belief is about scaling revenue teams? What have you learned through your time at Salesforce, now at Webflow, the very different motions that both those companies have run?
It's a great question. I think core beliefs are things that hopefully are lasting. And one of the biggest core belief started with find a good way of doing things, but always be open to someone bringing a better way of doing things. And when I break that down in terms of what that actually means, I had someone say this to me once years and years ago, and it stuck with me. There's getting it done and doing it right. And you can always get it done, but doing it right creates sustainable success. And I think as we talk about scalable and we talk about how do we create predictable, at the end of the day, it's about building systems that you can implement and you can run consistently, no matter where you are, that helps you become successful. And I think at the end of the day, this is really about starting with understand your business incredibly well, understand your customers, your partners, and your employees. And then how do you make that translation from their understanding into how you can operate with repeatable systems. And so, and I'll give you a tactical example of that. I think for me, one of the things that I know that really is important to me is not only do I need to understand the business, but how do I make it so every single person that I talk to can have that same context and understanding? Because in every role in the org, in RevOps, in sales and marketing, every role, they know more than I do at their job. They're living it every day. The thing that I can maybe provide them an edge on is context in terms of seeing a bigger picture field. And so one thing I've done, whether at Salesforce or here at Webflow, is one of the first things I did was say, how do I get them the exact context? And in many forms, that turns out to be data of like how to view the business so they can make decisions and bring new ideas to me. And so that was how I spent my first 4 weeks. I actually built out personally how to look at our business and what data points are really critical and how we all make decisions.
Wow, there's so many points that I want to dive into just off that alone. And I want to start with what you said, the dichotomy between doing it right and getting it done, because I've heard a lot of sales leaders over my career echo a sentiment that's more like, okay, perfection is the enemy of efficiency, or it's the enemy of speed, right? So how do you think about doing it right versus, maybe going too far down that route and wasting resources or sacrificing efficiency?
It's a great question. We've kind of started to adopt this moniker of go really fast, but don't break things. I think it's a play off of obviously the whole, go fast and break things. I think really the reason it came up is actually we're talking about our brand and how AI can influence how fast we can go with things and with our own product. But I actually think it applies to getting it done and doing it right. And so I do agree, like perfection is the enemy of good. And so like, how do you hold this dichotomy of how do you make sure you're not sitting in a place where you're trying to get this perfect? And how do you make sure you're getting it done in a way that's doing it right? And I think the answer to that sits most likely just in, is this something that we're going to have to do more than once? Because if it becomes something we're going to have to do more than once, then most likely we should probably do it right. And I think there's two questions I always like to ask everyone. The first is, how material is it? So is this big enough to matter over time? And the second is, I always ask, what would need to be true for us to not spend any time on this? To basically put a counter positioning of why we should actually get it done the right way versus just Band-Aid, quick, move on.
Yep. I love it. I love the questions too. It's very concrete. It's repeatable. It's like a framework for it every time.
Yeah, I think orthodoxies and questions around that actually have served me probably the best. I was on an interview the other day where I actually asked them, based on everything you've learned about Webflow, why would you not recommend it? And I wanted to understand how they would counter position. So it was just an example, but I find that those types of questions really help people open up their eyes, because I find that we tend to default into always trying to like add to solve a problem. And it kind of takes the opposite approach.
I agree. And you talked a lot about systems too. So, like you said, people tend to add, right? We have a problem. We tend to, maybe we add tech, we add training, we add processes, we add checklists, RASIs, SOPs, what have you. But how do they differ in your mind as a different type of thing, a different way of problem solving?
It's a great question. When I think about systems, I think the effectiveness of them is they should prevent us from being able to just add to add. It's kind of like the whole efficiency trap, which is the more you respond to emails, the more you respond to emails. So you get to more, and it just keeps going. And I think what systems do is if you create a right set of steps, you can contain that to basically not have scope creep. And so I think it becomes easier agreed upon language for teams to work together, and then obviously software to work together. So that's why I really, really believe in creating systems. And then the burgeoning of a new system tends to be, okay, let's just try, and let's try something that's maybe good enough, test it, and determine if we really want to codify this into the way we work.
We were talking a little bit before, and you mentioned that when you came into Webflow, the go-to-market functions were siloed, which I was kind of surprised by. I would have thought they were already unified, but that seems like a very substantial change, right? Talking about a change management initiative. What was that like as far as uniting all the go-to-market functions? And did you find yourself creating systems from the ground up or adopting what they did and kind of tweaking it a little bit? How did that work?
A great question. To understand where we are now, I think it helps to understand a little bit how we got there. And so Webflow was created as a better way to build a website. For the first 10 years, most of the growth came from our PLG motion, where people could try it. We gave development superpowers to people who didn't have the ability to, and it was a whole new way to build a website. So it was a website builder. Then over time, we added new capabilities and it became much more robust, like a CMS, AI optimization, and built-in SEO, and then more recently, like AEO tools and workflows. As all those things happened, and we basically, two things happened. Customers over that time period, and if you think about the last 10 years in RevOps and marketing ops, people ended up with Franken stacks where you had a lot of different solutions stitched together. And I think we all have seen that MarTech stack in RevOps. There's so many options. And so you have all of that. And then at the same time, we experienced a dramatic increase in interest in what our capabilities provided to large companies, like the Veriphones of the world, as an example. And so as a result of that, whether it was like a Verifone or an Orange Theory, we got pulled up. And now we were sitting in a world when I started where we had a part of the business that was really oriented to helping all the amazing community, individuals, freelancers, as well as smaller businesses, as well as upmarket. And it kind of became clear to me that when I started that at the end of the day, everyone now, because it's the last 12 months, really wants a system for all their web experiences, for their web marketing, and wants to bring it together, regardless if they're small or big. They want to be able to take advantage of the new AI technology. And so we just weren't serving our customers in the way that we wanted. And so what ended up happening is I would go in one meeting and the team was doing a phenomenal job, but they weren't connecting dots of what could make sense for, Orange Theory or Verifone at the same time as a freelancer. And so from my point of view, it was, how do I just bring our goals together and also the teams together? And this is where the human creativity and beauty comes alive, I think, in problem solving, is taking people with very different contexts and putting them together to solve customer problems and partner problems. And so that was really the problem I wanted to solve. Is we really shifted from 10 years ago being a website builder, now we're a web marketing platform. And at the end of the day, everyone wants the same thing. They want a brand that people trust, and they want predictable, measurable growth from their website and web experience. And so that's what I wanted everyone oriented around. So that's a little bit of the context. And then tactically, it was when we brought everyone together, the first beginning, I remember my first meeting was, when's the first, I asked this question at the start of my first meeting with my directs. Is this the first time everyone is in a meeting together? And exclude me, have all of you met together before? And the answer was they all had met with each other, of course, but never all at once, because it wasn't considered a full revenue leadership team. And so that was really the beginning of trying to codify a new way of thinking that was oriented around this evolution we had as a company.
Yeah, well, it's funny how often that happens, right? No one actually gets in the same room, and the magic that can happen when they do. I want to go back a little bit to what you mentioned about transitioning from product-led growth to then more enterprise motions and customers, because I think while that story is not uncommon for certain successful companies, I think a lot of companies and teams that I've seen worked with, they really struggle to make that leap. And so I think that'd be really valuable for our audience just to hear your thoughts on why maybe companies get stuck, or what can go wrong in that transition.
there's so many ways you can get stuck. So let's assume you have product market fit, and let's make it really a revenue distribution problem for the sake of the exercise. So say your product fits, it makes sense. You can solve these complex compliance issues and governance issues and all the normal things you see when you start to go upmarket, multiple people working in a system at the same time. The thing that the hangups are a couple things. One is your historicals don't serve you anymore because you're dealing with something that hasn't happened. And even when you start winning them, they look very different over time. And so you start to win some deals, some customers up market, and you're basically dealing with an ICP that's changing almost daily, like your upmarket ICP. I think we were really clear on our ICP around our agency community, which is incredible. And that has been crystal clear. I think how that business is evolving is something we're really working closely with our agencies and partners to go into the future. But you just look at historicals and you can't trust them because you're doing something new. Your deal cycles are longer. Your procurement process and the buying process has changed. And so a lot of triggers we built in RevOps and gates we said, and forecasting and how we think about connecting that to lifecycle marketing, all of those things, you're dealing with a unknown or something that's changing almost every month. So here's what you could do about it. I think one, now that you have AI, you actually can have a rolling ICP. So we're constantly, I always say the most valuable data you can possibly have is how people are using your product. The second most valuable data is the people you're talking to who use your product or evaluating your product. And so if there are people who are considering buying your product, how do you take all that conversation data, that raw data, and now that we have AI, how do you create a rolling ICP? And so that every single month as time goes on, you can say like, here are the conversations we're having, here are the types of questions that are coming up, here's how the ICP is drifting, and some of the data points you might need to just track on it as well from a RevOps perspective. Like you should expect deals take longer. You should expect that you have more, maybe you have more people buying as a part of it. Maybe you've now introduced a whole new process of legal that didn't exist before because your deal sizes weren't as big. And so that's how I kind of think about it. Like you can get really tripped up because you may think your expectations can be disconnected from like how things are moving. And what's interesting is today, with all the technology change happening across the industry, in software specifically, the reality is that, and it's not just software, but it's everyone's using AI in different ways. The reality is that the change and pace of that change is so much faster that you really are I'm always questioning myself of, is this something that's going to hold for months, or is this something that's just today and how's it going to change?
Yeah. Well, I think that's excellent advice. And I'm curious, that system in itself strikes me as the way to go, right? I see it now that I've heard it. I see the faith. I have faith in it. And at the same time, I'm thinking it's going to be kind of hard to convince people to like jump into that uncertain space and to be comfortable with, that rapid pace of change, and that uncertainty is actually the way we're going to do business for a while, because what we learn from that is going to help us build something that is sustainable and ultimately going to, we can ride in the right direction for a while. So from a human to human kind of connection, leadership side of things, how do you make people uncomfortable in that or comfortable rather in that uncomfortable space?
Gosh, that's such a good question, because I think it's, the messy middle, so to speak, or another way to think about it is, for those of you who, I don't know if you've read Jeffrey Moore, but he has the Crossing the Chasm, which is like this moment in time where your product, the people who got you where you're going, and the future may or may not be connected. You don't know, like, I think just because it's messy. But one of the things that I try to do with my team is I believe that context and giving people that as much information as possible to make them feel empowered and autonomous in the world is the difference. Agency is at the end of the day what I think wins. When people feel fear, and oftentimes around change, around how things might evolve, I find that it really comes down to like helplessness, or a feeling of lack of control, where they don't know, they don't feel empowered to do what they need to do, or they need guidance. And I think right now, with it just a reality, I think we all feel. My running joke to our CEO is like, "Oh, I'm always paranoid because I don't want to miss anything." And I don't think I am never not paranoid. I always want to just assume that I don't know yet, and that things are changing. So I think part of it is help make people understand that as a leader, I feel it too. And B, then give people the confidence as to why I think we can win in this environment. I always say that my teams hear me say this all the time. We play to win, and what playing to win means is not playing to like stay in the game. It's not playing to not lose. We're not playing for a tie. We're playing for the win. And that means that when things are really shaky ground, we actually have an opportunity to work with our customers and partners to find that future together and make everyone win. And that's what I have confidence in pushing toward.
That's excellent advice. And I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one who's continually paranoid. That's good to know. That resonates. So that strikes me as the mark of a good leadership strategy, right? To empower, to make people comfortable in uncertainty. And at the same time, I feel like we're going to talk a lot about how AI is changing things. And I think there are a lot of people at different levels that are paranoid, maybe for good or bad reasons, about like how AI is going to impact their jobs, how it's going to maybe take away some of their empowerment, because it might take away a skill set that's really valued historically, but maybe isn't so right now. So can you talk a little bit about like how you balance the human side of things versus the AI agent side of things, and where that balance should be in the work as we go forward?
Yeah. So the best way I kind of approach this is like, I ask myself, where do I believe that humans, which is funny that I'm even saying it that way, that my team and our partners together, where is the bet that what they can do will be driving a better outcome for our customers versus what an agent can do? And where do the two play together? And I think at a like tactical level, I think an investment area, for example, that I believe is that when you put a human with another human to have a conversation like we're having, we notice things, we get creative, we have curiosity that takes us in different directions that maybe was unexpected. We're not not always within the bounds. We're not like, our interaction is not me as an agent knowing everything I know about you, trying to give you the answer you want, which serves a really great purpose. But I think so when I think about that, I want my teams and Webflow's extended community working with our customers to have those moments to unlock new ideas, to push our thinking, to figure out what that future looks like. So from the one hand, we have a counterintuitive bet in investing in more humans in many ways that I want talking to customers. We still have something like an AI SDR, for example. We have these AI-driven workflows, but they're very much specific around where we see more value in just having an AI experience to get the answer versus having this conversation of exploration and trying to figure out things and pushing each other, customers pushing us pushing customers, and agencies all together. And so that's where I really feel the human investment and experience, and really stressing with our teams that that's the value that they can bring so that they show up that way. I think we were forced. I always say, like, a lot of our habits were forced not because we wanted to do it, but because it was required to do it. And the question I ask myself is, what habits can I undo that I can have AI do instead? That I don't actually have to do that anymore. I can spend more time on what we just talked about. And so I'll give you an example of a very specific couple of workflows. So one is I oftentimes have our teams asking me to reach out to customers or prospects and send them a note from me. And in the past, they would either draft it, I would say that doesn't sound like me, I would change it. Then I created the Crancifier, and basically they say what they give the context of like the circumstances. I trained it off of all the emails I've ever sent. I retrain it every month, so it's recursive. And then they can use that to put a draft, and it pops into my Gmail inbox, and I can review it. And it's like 95% of the way there. I tweak one or two things, but that's an example where that I could actually codify my system and my approaches and my principles of how I respond to people, how I talk, to make it a faster process. And the person who's closer to the account who wants me to engage can give it the context. And so there are workflows like that, or I've created a chief of staff workflow where I find it to be a thought partner. And these are the areas that I think can augment. So I can spend more time with customers, with our agencies, with our employees to really have that creative pushing of thinking and understanding.
I want to dive into the chief of staff one if you're comfortable. I think a lot of people would find that really valuable. Talk us through how you set that up and how that works for you.
The question I had when I started was, how might I teach AI how I think? And then I realized that maybe the best way to do that is I love to read books about psychology and business books and different flavors. And I realized that I take notes on every single book I read. I have them all saved. So what I actually did was I designed the chief of staff by first training it on all my notes about books that I read so that it could understand how I interpreted those books and what is it, my takeaways from it, things that I wanted to adopt into how I work. And we all been there. Like you read a book, like that's a really good idea. And then it's really hard to actually translate that into how you actually do things every time. And so that was my concept. So I built out this knowledge base around the books I've read, trained it off of that, and then gave it business context. And then now I've been using it ever since for everything from asking it about a business decision I'm making and telling it to give me blind spots to based off of like certain principles that I've shared of how I think I want to work or how I've interpreted certain books. What other way should I look at a problem? And so I've been using it in that way. And I actually spun versions off for like our CMO as an example, and our head of partnership and agency and my directs. I've been spinning them off so they each have their own version of it as well. That gives them a sense of like, I trained it, but then they can have their own version. They can kind of make their own.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'm going to say it. Yeah, that's the best advice I think I've heard this year. So thank you.
Oh yeah, happy. I like the funny one is I finished this book recently. It's called Writing for Busy Readers. I actually have it right next to me, which is why I said it. And it's basically just how to write in a world where everyone's busy. And I was like, this is so great. I loaded into the chief of staff, and now it's not only surfacing up content to me in its answers that it's using these principles, but it also helps. I can actually just say, hey, could you clean this up for Writing for Busy Readers because people are skimming, and it just like edits it. And it's pretty great because it takes all my notes, and I don't have to learn this time it takes to translate what I learned into practice is almost zero.
Yep. And that's a really good point too, because I think that a lot of people forget about that. They forget that they're writing for a very specific audience or communicating to a specific audience. I mean, it's crazy. Even academics, even trying to go after new potential students, it's like they're writing for other PhDs. Like it's the mismatch here. If you're talking to the 17-year-old prospective student, and it's funny. I was talking to a sales leader a couple months back, and he said something similar and then took it one step further, which I was really intrigued by. He said he then tailored his communication to everyone on the team differently after like the first month to find out how they talked, how they wrote emails. I was like, wow, that is such a great idea, but hard to, obviously there's a question of scale there. But yeah, I love it. Really have to zero in on the audience and how they're going to digest information.
I'm going to try that. I'm going to see how I can do that, but I love it.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, and so we've talked about where, I don't know, it does sound funny. It sounds like I'm an alien. Humans excel. Like they're different.
It kills me every time. I'm like, humans, but it's funny because now we're sitting here saying like, well, we actually need to have experiences that are humans and AI. So but it maybe makes it less human by saying that. But it's a easy shorthand.
Yeah, it still feels strange. I think it's going to continue to feel strange for a few years. But so going back to that and diving in a little bit more, I spoke to another CRO who is saying that, in his opinion, and this really resonated with me, that a lot of teams are still stuck in kind of what you mentioned earlier, like solving a problem by adding things. And one of the things they're adding is AI tools, right? They add them into the workflow, but they sit outside. It's another place you have to go. It's something clunky you have to interact with. But the real gains, both in efficiency and effectiveness, come when you treat it more like an operating system, something that's kind of running alongside you. And I know the Webflow recently released something that kind of is in that vein. So I'd love to get your opinion on that, if you see that as the future, and how you all are working to kind of bring that about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I'll use the funnel analogy because we all love funnels. Actually, I hate funnels. I hate the concept of funnel. Maybe it's the Tableau side of me, but I always thought that the chart of a funnel was just a terrible representation of what actually happens. So for those of you who love data, my favorite version of this is a Sankey diagram, which is actually just a user flow. So you can see where people drop off, where they drop in, because a funnel is so linear, you can only go down. But I think using that as a little bit of the analogy in terms of the system, I think we all built systems around this idea of top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel. For over a decade or so, since it became popularized, probably in the 2012, 2013. And with this shift that we've seen, I've actually thought about it a lot. And I think you could keep that analogy if you want. People are getting more educated, they're coming in farther. But in terms of the operating system, I actually view it as a pretty simple dual reality, which is discoverability and conversion. And when I think about like how have things changed in both these categories, and how do we systematize not only how we use AI, but how does AI impact the way those two things happen? And so as I translate that, because at the end of the day, we're trying to drive pipeline, we're trying to drive revenue. So if you organize it that way, discoverability, how has that changed? Which you could argue is middle funnel, top of funnel. Well, we're in a world now where AI is changing how customer brands are discovered, are evaluated. At Webflow, we saw a 125% increase of LM bot crawls across our 300,000 plus customers. So we're seeing just a dramatic increase in how often AI is looking at people's sites. And really, it's speaking to the fact that in discovery, you have to have a human experience and an AI experience, and you need to have both. The good news is, from everything we've learned, it doesn't make sense to have two completely separate. It's more about optimizing one experience to serve both audiences versus having like two completely separate experiences. But the analogy I like to give people is, when you look at a website, you're looking at these pretty images, pictures, headlines, whereas an AI is actually looking at the code underneath it. It's the same website. It's just they're looking at two parts. One is like looking at from one side of the mirror, and the other is looking from the other side. And so when I think about the system, it's first, how do we solve for discoverability in a world where now we have AI judging us ahead of time? AI is also making it harder to control our brand narrative, because it's not just about driving traffic, but there's a Columbia study that basically showed that 60% of results of the top the top 8 LLMs ended up being slightly inaccurate in some way. And so when you're talking about something squishy like a brand, they could be looking at Reddit or different sources to give a perspective. So I think from my point of view, really, it starts with how do you win in discovery and build a system around that, both for AI discovery and then when humans come into the loop. And so it's interesting because a lot's changing. There's been a lot of very popular metrics coming out around, HubSpot said they saw a 36% decline in traffic in a month in the last year. And we've seen SEO, according to Bain, it was like roughly 15 to 25% decline in SEO. So there's a lot of interesting stats. I think it's really just showing me, for like go-to-market perspective, we have to win at discovery. We have to understand how we're showing up. We have to rethink of how we think of awareness. And then when we get to conversion, this is where now I expect, we've said this for over a decade, which is people want personalization, people want it. But the truth was, I don't know about you, but I only really experienced it with Netflix. Like, I get on, Netflix shows me what I want. But in most other parts of my life, I didn't quite get like that same amazing experience. But now, now I do, because an LM can do it every time, or at least trick me into thinking it. And so I think the conversion side of the system, it's really like, how do we use AI to meet this shifting of, I want a perfectly tailored response to me, not because I need it, but because I'm used to it. And so that's how I would break down the system, is like shifting from a multi-step funnel into just discovery for humans, discovery for agents, and then conversion for humans, and probably soon to be conversion for agents.
Yeah. That's excellent advice. And I love that you made that point too. Yeah, we've been talking about it for more than 10 years, but who actually did it back in the day? Netflix. Spotify's still struggling, in my opinion, right? But that's a whole other can of worms. All right. Adrian, as we
Well, it's
move,
nice to know you're a Spotify. My wife is also major into Spotify versus Apple Music, you know.
it's got some problems, but yeah. I'm just fascinated about how the personalization engines work so well at times and so not well at other times, but something I can dive into on my own, maybe. As we move toward the end of the podcast, there are two questions that we ask every guest. And, Adrian, we're recording this in early 2026. So let's fast forward out. Let's go 5 years into the future. 2031, what's a big shift that you see coming for go-to-market strategy and RevOps that no one's really talking about right now?
I think everyone is talking about managing agents and building agentic workflows, and taking something that actually in RevOps we've been exceptional at in the last decade, which is built a bunch of automations. And now with AI, you can change it from rule-based to decision-based. I think no one's talking about where we actually are doubling down, tripling down on the human experience. And where do we need to insert that? My philosophy on how is, we can use statistics to determine where a human engagement is actually better than a agentic experience. And I think that's going to be something that almost everyone's that I talk to, including myself, we all get swept up in the conversation of like, how do we build more agentic experiences that help solve a customer problem? But I actually think where humans shine is going to be more and more of a discussion as we start to figure out where agents shine. And I think right now we're just in the world of everything's possible. Let's just see what we can do.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd love to see that side of the dialogue pick up a little bit more. Final question for you. Looking back on your own career, if you could go back 5, 10, maybe even 15 years into the past, what's the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
5, 10 years ago, I was really struggling with the fact that I had a manager who's a great manager, but mentioned something to me that just like irked me, which was like, oh yeah, you're a jack of all trades. And we've all know where that saying is. It goes, jack of all trades, master of none. And then I got really curious years later, more recently, actually, where does that come from? And I found out that it actually was used for William Shakespeare. Now, the funny part is like, I'm not pretending to be anywhere near his level of genius, but I was curious as to why. And what I found out was that there's actually another part of that saying, which is jack of all trades, master of none, but better than one. And I think that if I go back 5 to 10 years, I was, because I've been in sales, I've been in marketing, I've been in product, I've run operations, RevOps. And what I realize now is without those experiences that I was fighting the whole time, that I was like, oh, I don't know if I should be doing this. Should I just, I spent 4 straight years in marketing, and I'm going over to spend time in a different part of the business. But I was always struggling with that. Why didn't I just stay in one path for so long? Now that what I'm seeing, especially with what's going on with AI, it's probably the single most useful skill set that I have, is that I understand, because AI, I can give it context from different parts of my career journey. And I never would have predicted that. So if I could go back in time, I would say, like, actually lean into this. Don't resist it.
That's excellent advice. I never followed that to its conclusion. Right. As
Neither
someone who
had
knows
I.
Shakespeare well, it went right over my head. So that's fascinating. All right. Well, now that brings us to the end of the show. Adriana, if people want to learn more about you, more about Webflow, where should they go?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can come over to webflow.com and see what the future of the web looks like as we continue to really play around with our and enhance how we use AI and how it shows up in web experiences, both for human and agent. And with me, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a great show.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.